Welcome to this overview of Manitou's disaster mode. During this tutorial, you will learn how to plan for disaster mode, configure Manitou features, create disaster events, test your solution, and how to deal with a full alarm queue in the event a disaster event is created after the alarm queue is filled with alarms. For this tutorial, we make the following assumptions. You are familiar with Manitou's operator and supervisor workstations. You have a basic understanding of the event categories and event codes found within the supervisor workstation. You have permission to access the elements of disaster mode, including the supervisor workstation, event categories and event codes, the disaster mode from within the operator workstation, and the operator cancel function from the alarm queue within the operator workstation. Step 1. Planning. In order to properly plan for disaster mode, it is important to understand the disaster situations that may directly affect customers' locations. Some examples are storms, such as hurricanes, Santa Ana winds, tornadoes, blizzards, etc., power failures, including those caused by human error, fires, natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods, drought, and the like, terror attacks, and chemical spills. What other situations may cause a large number of signals to present to the central station? Please feel free to pause the video to write down some of your ideas. In order to complete the planning process, it is important to understand how your business should behave in these situations. In general, it's a good idea to consider the events that will present to an operator during a disaster situation. Some questions to ask are, how will you, for the vast majority of events, and customers respond? Do you have customers who cannot be placed in disaster mode ever? Or should you delay or change the priority of some high priority events? Once you have answered all your questions within your organization, it is time to set the event categories and event codes to their appropriate settings. Event categories and codes are found within the supervisor workstation. We start this process in the event categories to set our global standards. These are the when nothing overrides it, do this settings. To update the event categories, load the event categories form found within the supervisor workstation, maintenance menu, events, and event categories. And then within the disaster mode section, select the disaster mode type. Disaster mode flags the event as being within the area of the disaster in the alarm queue. This does not remove it from the queue, it simply shows that it is within that area. Autolog changes any alarms in the category to become a signal and log to the customer's activity log, but it will not present to an operator. Ignore means ignore disaster mode. It will make no changes to the events within the category when a disaster event is in place. Set the suspend and/or priority offsets. Suspend holds the alarm for a prescribed period of time before presenting it to an operator. The priority offset drops the alarming events in its priority by the number set. This sets the alarms within the disaster area to a lower priority than the same type of alarm not in the disaster area. Bold does recommend setting a minimum of disaster mode at the event category to ensure visual notification that the alarm came from within an area experiencing a serious situation. Offsetting the priority by 1 ensures that the alarms outside the disaster area are addressed prior to those inside. The event code form has one additional type not found in the event categories called default. That simply means that the event code will look at the settings on the category for its rules during disaster mode. The event code disaster mode settings allow the ability to individually override specific events to behave differently than the rules set on the event category. For example, your company may monitor a location that a power failure is a critical issue equivalent to a fire alarm. It is possible to create high-priority power failures to translate standard power failures on high-priority power failure accounts. This high-priority power failure would then have an ignore disaster mode setting, while the rest of the events in the same category would have the default to look at the event category for the rules. The suspend time behaves the same way as it does in the event category. The priority on the event code is a specific event code priority level to apply when the event is on an account within a disaster area. Step 3. Test. Prior to rolling out disaster mode, it is important to test the functionality on an account or a few accounts within a unique zip code or postal code. This ensures that all settings are set as you would expect before having to create a live disaster event. Before you begin testing, do the following 3 items. 1. Select the postal code that doesn't impact your direct operations. 2. Ensure that an account or group of accounts have that postal code on their site address. And 3. Create a disaster event for that zip or postal code. We step through that process next. Creating a disaster event. The disaster events are created within the Operator Workstation. Go to the Operator Workstation's Operations menu and select Disaster Mode. Edit the form and then click the Add button. Select if this event is a warning or a watch. A watch does not actually trigger any actions, it is just for reference purposes. A warning will generate the actions based on the disaster mode settings. Enter a description and enter any applicable comments. These comments should be descriptive enough to detail the nature of the disaster. The monitoring group should default to monitoring group 0 for most sites. If this is not the desired monitoring group, drop down the list and select the correct monitoring group. Set the days, hours, and minutes of the event. If the starting time date is not now, set the time for the correct starting time. This can be useful when watches or warnings are traveling across several states or postal codes. Select how to list the postal codes or enter them manually, or by selecting cities from the list. When testing, select the single zip or postal code on their test account. Once this list is populated with all the postal codes for the event, click OK to save the form. If it's a warning, this will activate disaster mode for the postal code described. When testing, send an event for every category. We highly recommend using real signals passing through the receiver as opposed to manual signals wherever possible. Verifying the signals. To verify the results of your disaster mode test, look for the following. Do the events come in or autolog as expected? If you set a priority offset, do the alarms outside of the disaster area hit the queue above the disaster event? And check the detail of the activity in the customer log. Does the signal qualifier line read Storm Mode or Disaster Mode? Once the events behave to your liking, disaster mode is ready for use. What if I don't create a disaster event before my alarm queue is already full? There are times when the disaster event becomes evident because of the sheer volume of alarms showing in the alarm queue. If this is the case, it is possible to go back in time and apply disaster mode. To do this, ensure there is a disaster event in place and set it to warning. Load the alarm queue and click Finish, then Operator Cancel. Enter your password to validate yourself and press the Enter key to validate the password. Click the Disaster tab. Enter a reason for canceling these alarms. Enter the number of minutes to go backwards to apply to the alarm queue, and then click OK. This goes through the alarms currently in the alarm queue and applies the rules on the event categories and codes. That's it. That's all there is to preparing for, testing, and dealing with disaster situations within Manitou. We have now reached the end of this tutorial, so let's review some key points. We learned what might cause disaster situations, how to set up company rules for the event category, for the when all else fails rules, and then how to override specific event codes to ignore disaster mode when necessary. How to test disaster mode by creating disaster events and testing signals through a test account, and how to deal with a full alarm queue when a disaster hits and the queue fills up before you have a chance to create the disaster event. Thank you for taking the time to learn how to prepare for, test, and manage disaster situations using Manitou's disaster mode.